Thank you. Good afternoon again, as I said, and good morning to those who might be joining us from the West Coast. I wanted to thank you for signing up for this webinar on the 5 things to do before bidding on US DoD contracts. Um, I wanted to have this webinar. We wanted to have this webinar to just address common questions that we get from time to time more broadly. And so this is an opportunity just to share with the common questions that arise when exporters are looking to either tap into the US market or to reconnect again with the US market. So today's webinar and engagement might be new for some, and for others, it might just be a refresher. We'll be taking questions at the end of the webinar, so I encourage you to use the chat box to submit your questions that you like answers to if it hasn't been covered throughout the webinar. So with that, I am going to jump into the webinar, just talk briefly about myself and my role here at the organization at CCC. So I'm the director for U.S. government operations. More broadly, I'm responsible for working with U.S. DoD on Canada-U.S. Defense relations, and also help Canadians navigate through DoD complex and sometimes bureaucratic um, uh, process, for lack of a better word. So I work more on the policy and legislation side of the house, and I have my colleagues who are online who also work through the contract process. So that's a bit about me, and now I will start the presentation. So the first thing I want to level set with everyone is the agreement that we have with the US and why we're unique in our relationship with the US. So we have what's called the Defense Production Sharing Agreement, and it's the agreement that enables Canadian suppliers, exporters to participate on equal footing with US suppliers when seeking to do business with the US DoD. So this is an agreement that has been in effect since 1956. If you have worked in any form with US DoD or with US suppliers, you might be familiar with what's called the Foreign Military Sales. So that's the US program as to how they sell controlled defense technology to other allies and partners. And so this is a simpler version of the FMS process, where through this vehicle, through this agreement, Canadian suppliers can sell directly to US DoD through the CCC, because based on legislations that is talked about, the DFARS 225.870, it specifically says when doing business with Canadian suppliers, DoD must or shall contract with the CCC. So it ends up being a government to government arrangement that it enables or facilitate Canadian suppliers to be considered in DoD acquisition process. So that's the baseline for why we do what we do and how we support Canadian suppliers. So the first thing, so now I'm getting into the things you must know, you must do when considering to work with DoD. So the first thing is one of the easiest part of the process is obtaining a DD 2345. And what that is, it's sort of an export license. And what it does, it enables US DoD to share technical data, unclassified technical data, with Canadian suppliers who are seeking to either bid on a potential procurement or seeking to get more information on a program that might be coming down the pike. And why I say this is the easiest thing, because the process can vary. I've seen it from a week to maybe a month. It's filling out a form, it's doing an online training. There's not a heavy lift here. Most of the work has to be done by you. You're not waiting on somebody to do a process. You fill this form out, you do all the self training, self-awareness training, and then you submit the form to PSPC, who's part of the Joint Certification Program, and they will do all the review, and then voila, you get the DD 2345. And that is the basic first step necessity that you need if you're thinking. It doesn't cost you anything, and as I said, it's a quick, easy lift. So if nothing else, a DD 2345 would be the first thing that I would encourage folks to get if you're considering working in the DoD arena. The next thing that you have to be aware of is SAM.gov and registering for SAM.gov. And again, this is another thing that's very simple. The process is very straightforward to an extent. I know I've heard from Canadian exporters, suppliers who have tried to register and sometimes run into issues in registering. And for some who are trying to recertify themselves, they run into issues. So I know there's a bit of complexity here, but for the most part, it's straightforward because you're answering just, again, questions about your organizations, uploading document relevant to your organization. And why this is important, this is where, again, you will find opportunities for DoD. This is where you can do a bit of homework, a bit of research as to who within the DoD is buying that particular goods or services that you're trying to sell. And also, being in SAM.gov or registering with SAM.gov enables DoD contracting officers to find you, because sometimes they do market research based on the type of goods or services they're looking for, and they'll just go into SAM.gov, look up the NAICS code, so that's the goods and services code that they have that's particular to an industry, and then they will Google who are the top, not the top 10, but who are the leading suppliers on this. And it will spit out a list, and they will probably go directly to them when doing market research to say, hey, we're considering this program, or we're considering this. Can you tell us a little bit about that? So that's why this is very, very, very important, SAM.gov, to register. And as I said, this one also is an easy lift. In addition to recognizing that there's some challenges from industry on that, we're also working with our DoD partners and stakeholders to deliver a webinar specifically on registering for SAM.gov and what that entails. And if you have issues, run into problems when registering, who to call, what to look out for. So I'll just share that. That's something that we're hoping to launch in the near term. I'm giving folks access to that, because that's another thing that, again, in my work, in my engagement with Canadian industry and suppliers, this comes up a lot where they're not sure what the next step when they have issues and concerns in registering for SAM.gov. So be on the lookout. That we'll have a dedicated webinar on registering for SAM.gov, in addition to using some of the tools in SAM.gov to find, as I said, the organizations within DoD that might be looking for your specific product or service. The Control Goods Program. So this is something that you also have to be aware of as it relates to defense and working in the arena of defense. And this is where I would say, or would suggest or recommend, that you really have a good understanding and before taking this next step. So the next slides are when you are definitely sure that this is the path, that defense is the path, and that you do want to go into DoD and work with DoD on whatever requirements that might be. And so this is where a bit of the heavy lift starts to happen. So the Control Goods Program is Canada's answer to the ITAR. So ITAR 126.5 provides some exemptions to Canada as it relates to the US munition list, the USML. And And our answer to that is that our industrial base will be registered in the control goods program. So registering the control goods program is a requirement, not only to work on Canada defense requirements, but also to work on US requirements. And so this is not something that should be just entered into. You should read upon this. Is on the PSPC website. PSPC is the department that is responsible for administering the control goods program. And so it talks a lot about, examining, possessing, safeguarding data that's entrusted to you by the government. And there's a process, again, to be registered into the program. And so you will need to, the link is on here, but PSPC website has all the forms and things that you have to do to submit this. And this takes a bit of time. So this could take 4 to 6 months to be registered into the program. I'm not saying it is 4 to 6 months. I'm just saying the time period that I've seen and that I've known is about 4 to 6 months. It could be longer, again, depending on a variety of factors that do come up through this assessment. But this is one thing now, when you are sure this is where you want to go, this is what you want to do, that next step is getting registered in the CGP. Again, and then this is a cascading effect. So once you're in the CGP, then you have to consider, again, security clearance. And the approach to security clearance has been different from a Canada lens, where PSPC is only, again, they're the authority on security and from an industrial perspective. So security clearances from the government of Canada lens through PSPC is evaluated or considered if you are bidden on a requirement. In the past, folks would normally just submit a request for security clearance and they would get it. We found, I think the government found that became unsustainable. And so their approach in recent years is that if there's a tangible line that could be connected for the reason for security clearance and the potential for the industry getting a contract, then a request would then be considered. So PSPC will do your security clearance, whether from an on-class level all the way up to whatever is required. Why this is also important is that once you obtain a Government of Canada security clearance, it serves as an equivalency with DoD. So all the things that we're sharing today, you don't have to replicate this in a DoD lens. These are things that are accepted by DoD on their own merit. So a security clearance from Government of Canada is the same as a security clearance from DoD. So if you're in a solicitation process, it would be good then to submit your request to say, PSPC, I am preparing to bid on this requirement, the solicitation, but it requires that I have XYZ clearance, and so I'm submitting my request to you. In addition to that, we can also sponsor. So if you are planning, so this comes up to planning as well. So if throughout the process you're following a program and it's, they've done some RFIs and you feel like this, within the next 6 months or so, an RFP is going to be published, you don't have to wait for the RFP. If we, CCC, determine there is, that opportunity that's coming, we will advance that and we will sponsor that in advance with PSPC and say, hey, we're getting a supplier ready in anticipation of this RFP that might be published within the next 6 months or whatever the average time frame would be. And so we could support that from that perspective. But again, it has to be tangible. It can't be just, I think it is, I made it. We have to see some evidentiary some evidence that this is something that could materialize, and that we're just not sponsoring security clearance for just getting somebody a security clearance. So that's what I would say on security clearances and why it's needed. Another question that folks ask about security clearance is whether or not NATO. So again, I understand that in our Canada context, a lot of companies, because of their international work, might have a NATO clearance, which doesn't always equal a US version. And so what I would always recommend and suggest is just to get that evaluation done by PSPC to say, hey, I have a NATO clearance, but this requirement is asking for secret or some other type. Would that be equivalent? We do know that, again, just talking about the basic on class, secret, top secret, again, the US doesn't have the same, but there's a bit of equivalency that we've come to agree to what that means in our worlds when we're talking US to Canada. But when you add NATO, I'm not sure how that flushes out. But PSPC would be the best point if you did have a NATO clearance and you're just wondering, how does that fit in the US DoD context? The contract security program. So again, this is one of, again, a very high lift, a high bar. If you're going to, again, these are things that take a lot of time, effort, and sometimes money. So again, if defense is not the way you want to go, I wouldn't recommend going into the contract security program process, just by virtue of the very detailed review and go, because now it's not just about about you, it's the organization, the people within the organization, how you will safeguard the building, your facilities, your IT, all the things that come with safeguarding and delivering on requirements. So contract security program is usually at the end where you have made that concerted decision that this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go all in. I'm going to work on defense contracts. And this is one of the, I would say, the heaviest of heaviest lift, because you're going to need what's called a facilities clearance letter. So PSPC will come to your facilities. They will evaluate it, again, give it a rating as to what type of documents you can store there, what type of equipment you could store there. It will do all the background check on folks, individuals that work for the organization that may come into contact with delivering on a potential contract. It looks also on other aspects of the facilities and the organization and the people. So again, this is not something that I would say, yes, go ahead and do. It takes deliberate thought and consideration, because it can be time consuming and it can require investment. Because PSPC might say, hey, in order to get this, you have to invest and upgrade your facilities, or you need to add this to your facilities to get a certain clearance for your facility. So this is one of the ones that are, again, if you're all in and you're looking to deliver on defense contracts, and this is what you want to do, and this is going to be a significant part of your business, this is what I would say, then yes, go ahead, because again, the investment may equal the reward. So those are the key things that you just have to keep in consideration as you navigate and make a determination as to whether or not, how far down the path you want to go. As I said, if you're just trying to get some intelligence gathering, data gathering, getting a JCP done, registering for SAM.gov, those are some of the basic things. And then from getting that information and help determine your next steps into really now investing in some of the programs and some of the requirements that you will have to abide by in order to deliver on defense. And so I'm going to navigate a bit to our role in DoD acquisition and how we work collaboratively with industry and how we can be of value to you. So as I talked about the DPSA, the Defense Production Sharing Agreement, so the essence of that agreement is one is to bring DoD and Canadian suppliers together through mutually beneficial terms and conditions. Right? That's our role, and this is why it's important for us to educate industry on the things that they need to do in order to help us achieve this goal. And then the second part is we guarantee the credibility and performance of Canadian suppliers. So this is why going through CCC is very important. It's a government-to-government agreement. And so we represent the government of Canada and industry interests to ensure that whatever we sign up to, our industry can and able or, to deliver on that requirement. And so internally within CCC, there are going to be some requirements that we ask of you to do that analysis to ensure the credibility of the organization and that you're able to perform that. So there is a due diligence process that we do with our industry partners to enable us to sign off that, yes, this company can deliver X, Y, and Z for DoD. And the third piece, and it's more to do with our relationship with the US DoD, that we take on some of their contract administration. So we do their pre and post award contract services that they would normally do. So again, one of the things we try to, what's the word I'm looking for, that we provide that assurance to our industry that the thing there's a word that we normally use that it's just I'm losing that word. Sovereignty, that's the word, that the sovereignty remains in Canada. So this is why it's important, right? So that your sovereignty remains here. So any activities that you do, we represent that and we provide that assurance to the US, just like how they would do if the government of Canada was working with a US supplier. There's a sovereignty issue too that they protect and that we can have access to. And so we rest on the assurances of the US government that whatever that contractor is telling us is accurate and it's something that they would do for the DoD that, they will do for Canada as well. And so that's what we also do. And this is a picture of a role and relationship. So again, in Canada, there's a lot of us who are in the defense world. And so we work very closely with PSPC and Department of National Defense, and to some extent, Global Affairs Canada from some export control and compliance. But for the most part, the key interlocutors are PSPC and D&D. And then you see the relationship. So from a Canadian supplier to a US DoD buyer, there's that technical relationship that we encourage, right? We're not here to take control of the entire process. We're here to help facilitate relationship and also to keep the government of Canada and DoD aligned on the expectation that's required under the agreement. So we provide to DoD, the government of Canada contract guarantee. There's an opportunity for Canadian suppliers to have that technical dialogue with DoD. And then we also do the contract management aspect to ensure that all the terms and conditions that we've agreed to government are flowed down to our Canadian industry supplier. So this is just a depiction of how the relationship works with all the parties involved. So again, our role as a designated contract officer, again, we support you. We don't do your business development, but if through that process, there are things that come up related to policy, related to legislation, or things you're just not sure about that you're hearing from a DoD, the program office, or whoever you're engaging with on the US side, that you may just need a sanity check or you're trying to get more information, definitely you can reach out to us. you're responsible for preparing the proposal. Again, we don't prepare the proposal for you, but again, as you are working through your proposals, there might be clauses, what are called federal acquisition regulation clauses, that might come up that you're not familiar with, or you just want to ask, again, advice or direction of where you could get more information. We can help through that. We do the due diligence. I talked about this in a bit about supplier capability, ensuring that suppliers can meet the terms and conditions of the contract that we're about to sign and guarantee the US of doing. Fair and reasonable, we work with PSPC with that in regards to, and this is where I talked about the sovereignty of Canadian suppliers, so that you open your books to us as the government of Canada, not to another government. So PSPC is the one that does that assessment, does that engagement with industry, and then we provide that assurance to DoD that we've done all the assessment when it comes to price, and that what you are charging, what you are bidding, would not be something that is over and above what the government of Canada would pay for something of similar. And then I talked about the performance guarantee, which again is very, very important. And I can say from 1956 to now, I don't think that performance guarantee has ever come has become an issue or has been contested in a court of law. And I've said to my DoD colleagues, if we can't find a resolution when a performance issue comes up, then I don't know what we would do. Just by inherently that Canada-US is so integrated, we always have found a resolution. We're not saying that performance issue don't come up. They do come up, but we've always worked in collaboration with DoD to find an amicable solution. So we've never had to contest this part of the agreement in a court of law. These are some resources on our website. So the first one, again, if you're looking on a step-by-step of how to sell or what you are planning to do or how to engage, these are really highly suggested, recommended resources for you to take a look at in selling to US military. In addition, we've also added DoD innovation programs. And I will just say that the innovation programs, they vary. There are a lot of them. They vary from organization to organization. Some are very inclusive of allies and partners. Some are very exclusive, where they say no foreign, and they refer to Canada as foreign, even though we're not foreign. We're part of the domestic base. But so I would say you just have to read through these and just look at, when it comes to innovation programs, which ones are inclusive and which ones are exclusive. Just because they're exclusive doesn't mean that we couldn't challenge them. Sometimes it's the fine print as to why they're exclusive. Sometimes they're just very US centric and they're meeting a specific US need. But for the most part, they should be inclusive, but we do run against some that are very exclusive. If you are looking to work with the research labs, that's one where we haven't been able to crack the nut on in regards to being able to work with the research labs. Those are very, very challenging and very secure. So research lab is one that I know that we haven't been able to move forward on. So I would encourage you again to just take a look at these additional resources on our website to help you, again, make that determination. Is this where I want to go? Do I want to put all the time, the effort, the money into getting myself ready to work with DoD for the long haul? This is another opportunity to find opportunities across the world, I would say. So I talked about SAM.gov, which is the DoD specific. But if you're looking again just at opportunities writ large that's available across the world, the GBOF is a one-stop shop that it gathers all opportunities that are on different websites. So from NATO from the Canada Buys, from SAM.gov, from other websites that promote opportunities, solicitation opportunities with governments. It's a one-stop shop. It brings it all here. And so you can go here and kind of look at all the opportunities that exist more globally, if you're just not wanting to be registered with a lot of different websites. So this is another resource that I would also tell you to take a look at, and to see what opportunities exist here. And so this is the end of my presentation, and I am going to stop presenting, and I'll see if any questions so far, something that is not clear, anything that come up that, maybe you have a question that I may not have addressed here that come up from time to time. Happy to take that right now.
For sure, Suzanne. There's been a number of questions, and so I guess I'll read them off for you and let you address them. So one of the first questions is the CSP only required for businesses manufacturing control goods, or is it a requirement for any product involved in a defense contract?
No, that's a really good question, and thank you, Anu, for asking that. It's more from from a controlled goods perspective, right? So we know that what we're learning or what we're seeing is the non-traditional defense-y type of innovation technology that DoD or the defense writ large, military writ large, are looking to leverage, don't always fall into that, because what happens is they will take that innovation and they'll add the difference. I know that's what DoD is trying to move out to, which is capture what industry's doing on the commercial side and then add the little delta that they need to militarize it. And so until that time, it's not a controlled item. So it's not part of the controlled goods program. So the controlled goods program and the CSP is more on things as I mentioned, the USML. So if you're not familiar with the US munition list, that's where you will see all the items that are generally controlled and that we have to keep track of.
Very good. The next question is, does JCP/DD2345 enable bidding on any unclassified contracts, including programs such as SBIR or maybe Spartan, SPARTN?
Okay, thanks for that. So the DD23, so the joint certification is the program. It's the program that's governed by Canada and US, and every defense supplier on either side of the border gets one of this, because it's one of the, as I said, the basic requirement that's needed. So, and what you get is what's called a DD2345, which is your export license. And yes, it can be used for unclassified technical data. When you mention the SBIR, or I think you might be talking about the STTR, those are exception programs. So those are programs that the US have, and this is where I talk about in the FAR. So the Federal Acquisition Regulation Section 19, FAR 19, talks about these exception programs for small, medium enterprise. They're set-asides. So they're only available to US entities. Canadian programs cannot apply for STTRs or SBIR. And so, but what you could do is work together with a US entity. And that's what we've seen because it's so strict. There's a partnership that occurs, and that's not going beyond the rules or the realm of the program. It's just that they can't directly give a contract to a Canadian company under the program as defined in FAR 19 and the legislations around these set-aside programs.
Okay, very good. Talk about NCAGE codes. Are they not a requirement?
Yes, NCAGE are a requirement, and so that's why I said on the resource website that I talked about towards the end, if you go to that and talk about selling to the DoD, there's a step-by-step. How do you find your NCODE, NACS? There's a step-by-step on how to do that. In addition, if you come back to when we set up our SAM.gov webinar, that's something they'll also address of how to find your NCAGE or how to get your NCAGE.
Very good. I'm not sure. I'm just going to ask this question because, I'm not familiar with the certificate that is mentioned. Is the CSP review more in depth than the one required to get a CCG certificate?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Okay.
So the CGP essentially is just the assessment of the the technology and the organization, the supplier, being registered, right? You're being registered in thing. The contract security program is a security review from all levels. So not just about individuals, it's the facilities, everything that will be required to deliver on that contract. That's why I'm saying that is very, very in-depth. And that sometimes require investment because you probably have to upgrade your facilities. We see that often where sometimes companies think they're meeting certain specification, and DoD will not DoD, PSPC will come in and say, yeah, you have to build it up to a different level. So it is the one where I know dollar investment may be required, and it's very time consuming.
Okay. Does the US DoD automatically know who to contact at CCC and perform contract negotiations after a Canadian business wins a deal? Or must the company overtly and clearly submit to RFPs via CCC?
So what we encourage, and this is why we are having these type of webinar and engagement, is that when you're considering bidding on a US solicitation, you need to signal to us. You should signal to us to say, hey, there's a solicitation that we're planning to submit a proposal on. Because one, we will provide you wording to put in the solicitation that will signal to the contracting officer that if you are down selected, this is going to be a government to government agreement. Not being proactive at the front takes a bit longer at the end. If you bring us after you've done everything, you bring us in, it's very hard to kind of get all the stakeholders aligned to get that done in a timely fashion. So this is what we're trying to share with folks and get folks to just, hey, signal to us, let us know that you are considering bidding, I am bidding, and then we know to provide language, or we can reach out, especially, and this is another thing why it's important to include us early, because DoD is very bureaucratic and they're very vast, and perhaps that organization has never worked with Canada before, right? So it gives us an opportunity to assess the organization and perhaps reach out to them and just kind of socialize who we are and how this relationship is going to work if they choose to work with a Canadian supplier. Because not everybody is familiar with the DPSA, and so it's easier to be proactive than at the end where we have to change everything and get it back into the right chain of command at the end.
Very good. Someone's asking, what is the cost of CCC service?
There is no cost. So the DPSA program is a matter of policy for the government. So we have an appropriation to work this relationship with the US to reduce the barrier. I think one of the keys to reducing the barrier for Canadian suppliers, and just advocating and sharing about what our industry capacity and capability is. There is a what we call it, similar to a mandate letter that the minister gets. There's a directive that's given to CCC on a yearly basis as to what we need to achieve and what we need to work with in collaboration as to what we're observing with the DoD. And one of the things that we're really trying to do is to work with DoD more on the innovation side. That's where they're looking for opportunities, is on okay, what's happening in the world of innovation for robotics, for AI, because the traditional, again, they're trying to go away from the traditional. They will always have a need for some of the traditional things, but for the most part, they're trying to rely more on industry and more on commercial products, and then just doing that bit of a delta to militarize them. But the appetite to invest fully into military capacity is not there. So that's what we're doing. That's what we're working in collaboration with. This is why, again, these engagements are important to us, so we get a better understanding of what Canadian industry is working on, what they're doing. So again, that we can say to the US, hey, you want some robotics? And I've shared this on many occasions. I had no idea that we are the leading country for robotics. The US DoD shared with us that they had used 2 Canadian companies in a test environment when they were looking to retrofit the Navy, because Canada is known for being a robotics country or leading technology, and I didn't know that. So it's learning what they're looking for and then trying to see what we can bring from a supply chain perspective and from a capacity perspective.
Very good.
So there is no cost.
Excellent. Can you address the NIST cyber standards, which are flowed to Canadian vendors via DFAR clauses and DoD contracts?
So right now, the NIST standards are flowed down when there's a requirement for it, right? When there's something to do with cyber or IT or some information sharing. What that's transitioned into is called the CMMC, which is, it doesn't matter what the contract is for, we're going to put those clauses in. We're not there yet. So right now, all our contracts only have that clause if there's something in relation to IT, cyber, and then we ensure, again, this is where that guarantee, we ensure that Canadians, because there's an audit that's done, we ensure that the Canadian company is meeting those NIST standards, and that, you know, if there's an audit that the US says, hey, we're coming to audit to make sure that they're meeting those standards, that we're not trying to meet it prior before, but that we've had that relationship and that we've been monitoring that. It says the nuance to the new version of what's going to come down the pike, which is still being finalized to become law in the US DoD, is that it's going to be on all contracts regardless of whether it's cyber IT. They're going to put it in every contract.
Okay. Do you want to comment on the Canadian program where we're at on cybersecurity?
Yeah, I can add to that. And so what has occurred is it normally does for all these things whenever the US is considering changes to anything, you know, allied partners, if they're not in alignment, will try to be in alignment to make sure, again, because of the integration of the industrial base, that there is no inhibitors to that. And so PSPC is the lead into facilitating a Canada version of CMMC in addition to how that equivalency will happen. So as I mentioned, like security, all the things that you do under Canada and you get approved by PSPC from an industrial participant in security, and it's looked upon and it's accepted on face value by DoD. It's the same thing we want to have with CMMC. And so those discussions are ongoing, and how the two will become equivalent is something that is a discussion that's ongoing. And I know PSPC has been sharing so far how the program will be not developed, because it's been developed. I think where they are is socializing or sharing with industry is how they see this rolling out. And the thought process is just going to be used on some Canadian contracts and see what the feedback, just similarly what the US is doing. They're testing it on some contracts right now, but it's not a requirement per se as yet. So I would also share that again, that's another thing to keep your ears open and eyes open, because PSPC is going to do some industry engagement that we will also be supporting as to the status of the program, what we're doing, and next steps. So that's another thing to keep looking out for.
Very good. Someone is asking whether the DPSA only applies to physical goods, but services as well.
No, it applies to goods and services.
Okay, very
It's
good.
both.
So another person asked, is CCC able to challenge RFPs which call for Made in America?
Yes, we do. And so we've challenged those. We've challenged a law on the books. About a year ago, we challenged a law that was on the books, that inhibited Canadian participation on a certain program. And it's never been waived for a partner country, but we again brought up the value of the integrated industrial base and the supply chain, and recognizing that we're in a different position we're right now than we've been in recent years, right? By virtue of the Ukraine conflict and all other things that are happening around the world. One of the trumpeting remarks that we hear from DOD is resilience of the supply chain. It's part of Prime Minister Trudeau and President Joe Biden roadmap for North America, is that we have a resilient supply chain. And so from that lens, we challenge things to say, well, this doesn't echo the broad policy or broad mutual paths that, you know, Prime Minister Trudeau and President Joe Biden are looking for their government to support. So yeah, so we can challenge those. I would also say that it also depends on the Buy America. So what you should know is that when it comes to defense, by matter of policy, Buy America does not apply to defense. By virtue that the DoD has reciprocal agreements with 26 countries, and Canada being one of them, it's in their legislation that the DoD's position is they do not apply Buy America to defense goods and services. So if you ever see that, we definitely have good footing to challenge it because it doesn't apply to goods and services from the defense landscape.
How or can and how does a Canadian business bid on US DoD contracts for bases located in Europe and Africa?
Oh, that would be challenging if you're not there. So DoD bases, they normally look for services within the area of operation, right? So if a base is in Europe, they're going to look to the European market and actually their immediate location for services. So it's a bit challenging if you're looking to provide services for bases that are in those locations, unless you've got a footprint in those locations. Then it would be challenging from a Canadian supplier to do that overseas. And if you did have a location that was overseas, then it wouldn't be part of the Canada US. It would probably be foreign. So that's a bit challenging on the basis that's overseas of trying to provide those services. But again, the other workaround is there might be US entities that have some of these set aside programs that you could partner with, right? So again, it's about doing research and understanding who's who in the zoo. And I think that's why the webinar with SAM.gov will be very beneficial, because you will also know who holds the contract on a particular defense goods and supply. That's not a secret, right? They issue out the contracts. It's public notice that XYZ has this contract and for how long, and whether or not it's going to come up for renewal. So again, it's just by matter of using the platforms you have to gain information and to position yourself for whether RFP is coming down or whether contract renewal is coming down.
Can you comment on CMMC certification and FedRAMP?
Okay, so as I said, CMMC is a NIST requirement that's going to be on all government contracts moving forward once it's finalized and codified into law. FedRAMP is a different thing. FedRAMP is about because you can have CMMC and that's fine, but FedRAMP and what I am learning, again, I am not I'm still learning about FedRAMP and the processes, but what I have gathered from companies who have run into issues with FedRAMP is one, again, FedRAMP doesn't understand the gov to gov aspect, and it's very hard to find a person to talk to, right? Because everything is so automated over there. And getting them to recognize certain certification that you might have from a Canada lens is challenging. And so I know getting into FedRAMP for a few folks that I've come across has been really challenging and frustrating. And I'm still trying to figure out how to engage FedRAMP or who to engage about FedRAMP. So that's all to say that I don't really have a good answer because I'm still trying to figure it out, and that I know that's an issue for industry in regards to getting into FedRAMP and being accredited by FedRAMP, which is separate and apart from CMMC.
Okay, so maybe that's, we'll look to see if we can find a FedRAMP expert for a future webinar, because it
There you
sounds, because
go.
there's a couple of questions on FedRAMP, and
Yes.
so it might be helpful to do a separate session just on that.
Yeah.
A gentleman's asking that they have an industrial product that they think would be an excellent fit for DoD, but the product is not produced in Canada. Will that be a challenge for them?
So I'm gonna say it depends. It depends on where the products come from, and where it's very, very explicit. The US has called out anything produced in China, they just don't want in their supply chain, right? So China is explicitly called out in their legislation that no DoD or nothing going into the DoD supply chain should involve anything from China. So that's very explicit. Then it comes down to depends on where else is it being produced, right? So because there are other factors around that too, right? In regards to human trafficking, all the different things that have just come online that influence the supply chain and the integrity of the supply chain. So I would say that depends on where, but you probably have to get it to Canada to get it out of the country, right? Because again, the whole thing is this is an integrated industrial base. So whatever Canada suppliers are provided should be coming from Canada crossing the US border to them. So again, there's a lot of different factors there that would have to take into consideration as to whether or not it would be considered Canadian.
Oh, I may have lost you there. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay. All right, maybe it was just on my side. I suddenly lost you for a couple seconds there. So we have a lot more questions than time for this webinar. So we're going to have to, I think what we're going to try to do is figure out a way to get the answers out to everybody on these questions, because there's a lot of good questions. And Suzanne, maybe we'll look to do another session just on Q&A where we can ask people to submit their questions and you just focused on just answers to questions. But we still have a few more minutes, so we'll try and answer as many as we can. So someone's asking, when you're talking the term security clearance, are you just referring to personnel security clearance? So something tied to a person, or are you talking facility clearance?
Both. So security clearance starts with individual, and then the facilities one, which is part of the contract security requirement. So you would start off with the individual ones first, and then as you progress, then it will be all encompassing. And so you might start off with just having a couple of key people cleared as you're working your process. And then by the end, so when I talk about your process, the solicitation process, responding to an RFP, right? You might just say, okay, these are the people who are going to work on the RFP that I want to make sure that they have it. And then if you are down selected, then that comes with the additional facilities clearance, depending on what the requirement in the contracts with security is. So again, that's another piece of advice when looking at the RFP. Look at what the security clearance is, because requirements are, because that will tell you what you have to get ready for. Because if you don't have a facilities clearance, then you might have to wait for another time around. If again, this is why you have to do your research and due diligence, that you know what the program expectation might be, and getting yourself again ready in advance of that, and not trying to be ready when RFP hits the street, because it's going to be too late.
Good. All right. So this next question follows up on the SBIR question. So this person saying, since OTA from that program seems to be a pathway for Army applications labs and others, is there a specific requirement for what defines a U.S. entity that can be partnered with? So is it possible for a Canadian company to set up a U.S. subsidiary that has U.S. employees or some percentage of U.S. ownership to be eligible?
Okay, so that's a two-part question, and the two are different. So OTAs and SBIRs are two totally different programs. So OTAs are open to allies and partners. They're supposed to. That's the directive that comes out of DoD across the board. However, when it goes down to programs, each program execute OTA differently. So they'll say, oh, it's only US companies that can apply on it, which is not true. And we could challenge that, right? Because that's not the overarching directive that comes out of DoD. So that's one issue, that OTAs are supposed to be open for partner allies, especially what they're called the National Technology Industrial Base. So that's Canada, Canada, UK, Australia, and New Zealand. Technically, the Five Eyes. That's is supposed to be open to. When it comes to SBIR and STTR, the requirement is that they have to be small, medium enterprise, and that they have to have 51% US citizenship owned, right? So whoever the owner is has to be a US citizen, is 51%. If a Canadian entity wants to get into that space, want to tap into SBIR and STTR program and want to comply with that, that's a business decision. But what I've often told Canadian entities, having a US entity is not a matter of law, right? There's nothing that says Canada, a Canadian supplier has to have a US office, a US subsidiary. There's no such thing on the books. If you choose to open a Canadian subsidiary, it's because you're making a business decision, and that is not a US DoD requirement. So that's what I would say on that question about SBIR and STTR. So again, it's 51% US citizen has to be owned, and it's your choice, but it's not an obligation or requirement by law. Anu, are you there?
Oh, I'm sure she's here. We have so many questions.
Oh.
I think she's just trying to put them all together.
Yeah, so are you okay to keep going with questions?
Suzanne?
If people are still here, I can do another 10 minutes.
Okay, very good. So, so if a company works with a US subsidiary, do they still work with CCC to submit the bid?
Sorry, repeat the question again.
Okay. So if a Canadian company works with a US company or a US subsidiary, are they still required to work with CCC?
No, they would go directly and partner with the subsidiary and submit their bid that way. What we're saying, the advantage of us working through the CCC, by one, as I said, it's a matter of law. But we know there are certain things that Canadian companies have to partner with US suppliers because they're not the total product provider. And so in that sense, they work directly with the US supplier. They don't need to come through us. But if there's a contract that they're providing, that direct solution is not being integrated in something bigger, then there's no reason to funnel this through a subsidiary and let them slap on a US cover letter to submit it. There's
Very
no
good.
advantage and there's no value there.
Okay. For Canadian-based companies with a US entity, is there a path to a facility clearance like there normally would be with a US-based company? This person says, I'm of the understanding that the foreign ownership factor requires the company to go down the special security agreement with GCSA, but is this accurate?
Yeah, so they're talking about the FOCI. So again, the FOCI, so the foreign ownership, I forgot what the CI is. So essentially what it says is that, and Canada doesn't fall into this, right? The US DoD is very cognizant that there are suppliers, defense suppliers, that are owned by governments. And so that's why that FOCI comes into place. And it's applied judiciously across the board. There's no broad assessment. And so if you do run into that, you need to let us know because again, they're mitigating circumstances of us engaging with DoD and finding the rationale as to why a FOCI might be needed. There might be just some intricacies there, but for the most part, what you have in Canada is acceptable. There is no need for something else unless there's a really extenuating mitigating circumstances, and then we comply to that to an extent, but not to the degree that you might have to do if you're a different country. Again, Canada has a uniqueness with DoD, and we have this, everybody wants to say they have a special relationship with the DoD, but by virtue of the integrated industrial base, we try to make sure that some of these policies and some of these approach that we know the US is applying, that is not done broadly on Canada than on other areas, because we know what they're trying to achieve, and normally we don't fall into that bracket of what they're trying to achieve.
Okay.
So I don't know if I really if I answered that question. Essentially, I'm telling you, you shouldn't need anything else other than what you have in Canada. And if you do, let us know. If
Okay.
somebody tells you that you do, let us know.
So under what FCL are the PCLs maintained?
Sorry,
How's-
no, this question has stumped me. I don't know what a PCL is. I know what the FCL is.
Okay. So maybe this is one that we follow up via email.
Yes.
So there's a couple of questions here that I think is worth asking and more clarifying CCC's role. So someone's asking whether we have experience brokering video surveillance software, and then another person is asking about support for smaller service providers who are thinking about partnering, targeting US-based government contractors. So I think in general, I think it'd be worth summarizing again what services CCC offers.
Okay. So I'll start from the legislation. This legislation in the federal acquisition talks about the simplified threshold of 250,000, and essentially says anything above that has to go government to government when it comes to Canada. So it doesn't matter what it is you're trying to sell, as long as you're going to DoD and it's over 250,000, CCC is involved, right? And so we're not a brokering firm, we're a government entity that is working collaboratively with our industry to participate in DoD solicitations. We're trying to reduce any entry to barrier, whether it's, as I said, through policy, through legislation, through just working and crafting an approach to the solicitation at the forefront, right? And so our role is to work very closely with industry and with DoD to achieve that mutual outcome, right? I talked about the pillar of DPSA is to bring DoD and Canadian industry together and provide solutions for them. So in that aspect, that's what we do. And then, so what was the second part of that? So that's, when it comes to smaller companies. So when it comes to smaller companies, it's not that we don't work with you, we could work with you. But again, you have to this is where it becomes challenging for small companies. You have to understand the level of effort that is going to take to get into that spur and that dedication. So this is why I say start with the small things like getting a DD 2345, starting to get information on what you're trying to sell to the US and kind of assess what it's going to take, right? To make that determination, do you want to commit all the way through? Because when you start to commit, it takes a lot more effort, time, and money. So that's what advice I would provide to small entities that might be looking, and also do your homework in regards to, this is where partnering with a potential US entity would be beneficial. Again, we see that too, where you're so small, but partnering with the US makes it worth the while. So that would be an opportunity, but you've got to do your homework. And that's why I think the SAM.gov webinar that we're going to be doing in the future will be very helpful in how to find that type of information.
That's excellent. Thank you, Suzanne. And so we will wrap it up at this point. So, so just to summarize for everybody, we'll make a recording, this recording available. We'll also try and summarize not only what Suzanne presented, but also a lot of the questions and answers so that it becomes a handy dandy guide for you. Suzanne, I think we're going to have to do this again. I think there were just so many great questions. And so the team at CCC are going to figure out what are some options in terms of formats, but maybe we'll look at getting people to submit their questions in advance, and we will do some focus sessions on specific areas. In the meanwhile, stay tuned. We've got a couple more webinars in our sites to deliver on how to do business with the DoD in specific areas. And so I'd like to, on behalf of the CCC team, thank everyone for joining today's session, and to stay tuned for an email coming out that will summarize all the information presented today.
And with that, thank you all again for participation and have a great rest of your day.